name is CJ from Arvada, Colorado.
My name is David, and I live in Grand Junction, Colorado.
We are not numbers, we are names.
My name is Katie.
My name is Ben Gonzalez.
More than 5 million Coloradans, each with a story about how the COVID-19 pandemic has changed life as we knew it.
I happen to be a self-employed Uber driver.
My father passed on the 30th.
We're hurting right now.
And you have questions about how to keep your family safe, how to make a living, about how our state can put itself back together again after the Great Distancing. We know the numbers. They're staggering. 179 of our neighbors have died. Thousands more are sick. Thousands more will get sick. Hundreds of thousands of Coloradans are losing their jobs. And there's the uncertainty of it all, not knowing when this will end, because it will end. But at what cost in lives and livelihoods? Tonight, we are Connecting Colorado, a town hall with Democratic Governor Jared Polis. Your questions, the governor's answers. From 9 News in Denver, broadcast statewide in collaboration with KRDO News Channel 13 in Colorado Springs, KKCO 11 News and KJCT News 8 in Grand Junction, KOBF in the Four Corners, and Colorado Public Radio and its affiliated radio stations around the state. Live from Denver, this is Connecting Colorado. Good evening, Colorado. I'm Kyle Clark. Thank you for welcoming me into your home. Welcome to mine. Hundreds of Coloradans from across the state have sent in questions about the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 500 at last count. We will try to get to as many as possible in this commercial-free hour, which is being broadcast into every corner of our state by 5 TV stations and 6 radio stations. Our guest for the hour, Colorado's Democratic Governor Jared Polis, who joins us from the governor's mansion. For additional perspective, we have state epidemiologist Dr. Rachel Herlihy, as well as former Congresswoman Betsy Markey, who runs Colorado's Office of Economic Development. Welcome to you all. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Kyle.
Governor Polis, I want to begin with you. Far and away, the most asked question we received was about testing, how to get tests now, how we will use testing in the future to reopen our economy and our society. We've tested about 28,000 people statewide. That's roughly the population of Windsor in a state with more than 5 million people. Kaz Hashigami of Denver is concerned that without a test, he has been unknowingly transmitting the virus.
What are you doing to fix the testing here in Colorado? My father passed on the 30th. I could have, prior to getting sick, I could have asymptomatically passed the virus to a coworker, and they passed this week. They won't even test me for the virus.
Governor Kaz is heartsick about this, but he doesn't have any symptoms. So when will people like him be able to be tested?
So this is really important, Kyle. So we're only a month, if you can believe, about a month and 2 days since the very first case. We had the ability when this started to do about 200 tests a day in Colorado. That's increased 10 times. It's now about 2,000 a day being done every day between the state and the private labs. We have the capacity to do about 10,000 a day, and we need the supplies to grow to that. But here's a very important message for viewers. If you're experiencing COVID-19-like symptoms, we don't want you to go out, scramble around, try to get a test, go to a hospital. You might spread it and put others in danger. 9 out of 10 people who have COVID-19 don't need any medical attention. You just convalesce, you stay at home, you isolate, you get better, just like you would for any illness. You don't want to give other people COVID-19. You don't want to give people influenza. Now, if you do need that medical attention, if you're that 1 in 10 that COVID-19 affects your ability to breathe, seek medical attention, call 911, go in. But we don't want this mad scramble. There's, about over 5,000 confirmed cases, but there's probably 30,000 cases or so of people that have COVID-19. The last thing we want is all 30,000 of those folks, plus another 30,000 who might have the flu, to be scrambling all over town getting tests. That would be very bad and help spread the virus.
Mm-hmm. But I think we're agreed that as we look forward, that mass testing is going to give us the information that we need to be able to reopen the state. Dave Lorenzen is a pilot up in Steamboat Springs. He said that in his work he relies on good data to make good decisions.
Why aren't we striving to be able to test everybody? And if we can't do that on a federal level, can we perhaps test everybody on a state level?
Yeah,
If
so
we
let's
could
talk
hear
about
from
the
the
different
state epidemiologist, Dr. Rachel Herlihy, on that real quick, on this idea of mass testing. Dr. Herlihy, do you see a path from where we are now to the ability to do that kind of testing? And if not, what's in our way?
Strategy.
It appears that we've lost
future.
Dr. Herlihy's audio. So, Governor, if I could turn to you, what are your folks at CDPHE telling you about the path from where we are now to mass testing? Because it requires the tests, the materials, the reagents, and the PPEs.
The frustrating thing is because there wasn't mass testing when this started, and that's anywhere in the world, United States, Colorado, any state, the only lever to stop it was this extreme social distancing we're doing. Okay. Once we start going back to normal, the mass testing is going to be a big part of that. Doesn't mean everybody, but mass testing wherever there's an illness or whether there's somebody at risk. I think Dr. Herlihy is back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, Dr. Herlihy, feel free to jump in on that idea of mass testing. Go right ahead.
Great, absolutely. As the governor said, testing is certainly going to be an important strategy going forward, paired together with our public health strategies around disease control. So isolation, quarantine strategies are going to be very important to limit the spread of this virus and to allow us to go back to normalcy and limit some of those social distancing strategies that we have in place right now.
Dr. Herlihy, can I ask you, if we stay at the testing capacity that we're at now, or even if we say that we're able to get to the testing capacity that Governor Polis has outlined, is that a testing level that would allow us to ease social distancing, or would we need to get beyond that for you to feel comfortable?
Yeah, that is certainly our goal, is to get to a point where we can rapidly identify individuals that test positive in the state. So that means we need to have places to refer this. We need to have the testing resources available. That's what we're working very hard right now to secure, is those resources that we need to really control the epidemic with disease control strategies. And obviously, it's an important part of it.
Mauricio in Colorado Springs has a pretty blunt question about how we might approach this until we're able to get to that level of testing everybody's talking about.
Instead of having test sites for COVID-19, why can't we just assume we have it?
What about that, Governor? What you've said to folks, if you think you have symptoms, just stay home because there aren't effective treatments at this point and you only need the hospital care if you're in a really dire situation. But what do you think about that idea of just kind of having every Coloradan assume at this point that they either have it or have had it at some point?
Well, I think the questioner was right. I mean, if you have any flu-like symptoms, assume that you have it. And in many ways, what this sort of mass quarantine effort and the need for people to stay at home is really predicated on the fact that because there's not enough tests in our country, in our state, 25 to 50% of people that have it are asymptomatic, meaning they can spread it without knowing it. And that's why that we're taking these steps to avoid the spread of this virus from people who don't even know they have it. It's also why it's important to wear masks, facial coverings, covering your nose and mouth, not restricting your breathing, obviously, whenever you go out. That'll also help control the spread of the virus and help us return to normalcy sooner, save lives, and it could even be your own life.
Let's discuss the issue of ventilators and whether Colorado has enough or can get enough for the expected surge in patients. Katie Markman from Parker has this question.
I heard on the national news that Colorado is projected to be one of the next hotspots for this virus. I also know that your order for ventilators was canceled by FEMA. So my question is, will Colorado have enough ventilators if the projected increase in the number of cases prove true? Thank you.
Governor?
Yeah, the answer is, as long as we're staying at home and as long as that behavior started like we think it started when we first talked about it, we closed the restaurants and bars, and that effect is already reducing the growth of the virus. Remember, it's still increasing in numbers. It's just increasing at a much slower rate. In fact, the doubling time has gone from a day and a half to more like 10 days. So we bought the time that we need. And of course, as long as Coloradans are staying at home, I think we'll be okay with regard to the ventilator situation. And that's really what's most important here. It really just depends on people's behavior. I mean, if tomorrow people started going around like they did in January, February before this went in, there would obviously be a shortage. But right now, early data shows What Coloradans are doing the right thing. Individuals are making the right choices. They're staying home. Generally, I mean, I know you probably saw, somebody out there violating it, but people are generally staying home except when necessary. They're often wearing masks in grocery stores, and when they go out, we're starting to see that difference already. And as long as that continues to occur, we should be able to have enough ventilators for those who need them.
I think a lot of people who are taking the time to watch an hour-long town hall on this tonight are pretty interested in the details of this. There's a good chance, Dr. Herlihy, that they have followed some of your presentations, at least through the news media, about what the state's modeling through CU shows. If I'm not mistaken, the model you presented yesterday showed that if Colorado can achieve 60% social distancing, that we might bump up into the capacity of our hospital system at some point. But if we're able to get to 70 or 80% reduction in social contact, 70 or 80% social distancing, then we'll stay below capacity. What I haven't heard is where you, the health experts in the state, think we are right now percentage-wise. Right. So we know that from the early strategies that were implemented, and this was really before the governor's stay-at-home order, we believe we achieved about 45% social distancing with those early strategies. It's really going to be in the next couple of days that we can really measure how much social distancing we have achieved. We are certainly hoping that it's going to be 70 to 80%. We anticipate it could perhaps be anywhere between 60 and 80%. And those numbers are what are really important for us to try and track and understand in the next couple of days to really understand if we can stay below that threshold for ICU beds we might need in the state. Have you also done modeling, Dr. Herlihy, on what a loosening of the social distancing restrictions might look like if we were to take it back to where the governor took us originally with restaurants and bars closed? At what point is that sufficient? What do your models tell you? Yeah, so we're working closely with our partners at the University of Colorado and asking a series of questions. And the data that we presented yesterday was really that latest set of questions, trying to figure out how much social distancing has achieved. But you're correct in that our next question is going to be, at what point in time can we loosen those social distancing strategies, and to what level? And what does that look like after the social distancing or the stay-at-home order ends? What do those case counts look like? And so that's really our next series of questions to ask. Betsy Markey from the State Office of Economic Development, thank you for waiting patiently while we dealt with some medical matters. I want to turn to some issues of economics now. And a question from Michael Braband of Centennial, wondering about how the state weighs the medical necessity of protecting people with the potentially lasting economic damage that's being done.
And I was hoping you could share with us what sort of analysis is being done to make the determination at what point the stay-at-home order becomes more damaging to society than the virus itself.
Well, sure. That's a great question. But really, at the end of the day, the quicker that we can deal with this health crisis, get the disease, get the pandemic under control, the quicker we can get our economy back on track. I mean, the worst thing that we can do is to open too quickly, see another reoccurrence of the disease among people, and then we are that much further back. So we are doing everything we can. We are approaching economic recovery the same way the governor is approaching the health crisis. We're being aggressive and proactive and seeking all the assistance that we can for people in the state. Currently, there's 3 forms of economic relief, and they are the $1,200 checks that will be issued to every adult, an additional $500 for children under 16. Second is increased unemployment insurance benefits, and the third is the Paycheck Protection, loan forgiveness, and also economic injury loans for our small businesses. And we want to make sure that all of our businesses, all of our sole proprietorships and contractors make use of those programs, and they make use of them today. One of the things you mentioned there was the federal stimulus. We received a couple of questions from Coloradans curious whether the state has the financial wherewithal to do a state stimulus, a one-time payment or something of the same. Imagine that would be difficult, as we just took a $2 billion chunk out of the state budget as a result of the crisis. Well, I think our efforts right now are focused on making sure this is a historic amount of federal money coming into the state of Colorado, and we want to make sure that every Colorado business is able to take advantage, full advantage of those programs. We're encouraging businesses and those in the gig economy to apply for everything that's available, whether that's paycheck protection, economic injury loans, apply for them all. At the same time, we are looking at the state. Where are those gaps? What are those businesses that individuals that may not be able to, for some reason or another, qualify or access that federal money? And we are just beginning to look at where are those gaps and how can the state help as well.
Governor Polis, I know you're acutely aware, because you've spoken about this, about the fact that Coloradans en masse are saying that they want to know what they're signing up for. Even if it's not an end date certain, they want an idea of what we're aiming for, what the metrics are going to be, what a return to normalcy might be. We heard this from Lauren in Littleton and Ryan in Denver. And here's a question from C.J. Dickinson in Arvada.
What does the end of this look like? When the stay-at-home order is lifted, how does normal begin again?
So first, let's talk about when we get back to totally normal. That means stadiums full of people, congregations of thousands of people going to mass. A lot of that will need a cure or a vaccine, meaning when can we go back to the way things were just 2 or 3 months ago? There needs to be a cure or vaccine. What's going to happen first is an opening of everything of the economy, but we'll still have to be very wary about those large gatherings, how we do them. People will see masks. We'll have to jump on any infection with mass testing, isolation. So what you're going to see is, yes, people will be able to go back to work, and our goal is about 5 days before the rest of the country, April 26th. If we can do it even a day or two earlier, that's hundreds of millions of dollars of economic productivity of you earning a living. And yes, if it takes a few days more, we have to make that call. But what that means is, yes, people are going into work. It doesn't mean that bars and restaurants are opening in the same way right away. It might mean that a week or two later, restaurants have to have half capacity. We're working, and we have the business community, the health community working together on kind of what these guidelines will look like. We have this time to do it now, because we know that unless the news is better than we anticipate, we won't be able to pull that trigger until April 26th, starting April 27th for the reopening. But we're getting that fine-tuned model where we have as much productivity, as much people able to go to work, as much of our what makes Colorado great as possible, without leading to a second surge, which would mean there would need to be more severe measures. So that's what our health experts and the business community work on every day.
A moment ago, Governor, Betsy Markey was talking about the idea of making sure that we don't lift restrictions early because we have a relapse. And it occurs to me, in a state that is as dependent on tourism dollars as ours, that it will be vitally important for outsiders to see Colorado as a safe place to go once America and the world begins traveling again. Is that part of your thought process?
So this is going to affect different important Colorado industries in different ways. It's going to be difficult times for tourism and recreation industry, because even after these restrictions roll off, and they will in many ways sooner rather than later, the world isn't traveling again right away. I mean, people are scared out there. The airlines have cut back, 80–90% of their flights. Yeah, they're going to put, they might be at half capacity in a couple months, but that's not the same level of business that we normally have for our high season in summer. So unless the tourism behavior snaps back when the health restrictions are off, it's going to be a long tail on the difficulties for that industry. But what we can do now, again, by making sure people are staying at home, we're doing the most we can to protect as many jobs as we can and from getting the economy going as fast as we can.
We're going to talk about the mountain towns and the particular situation that they find themselves in just a moment, but want to turn to some immediate concerns, some month-to-month concerns for Coloradans across our state. Lorianne Mills is in Denver. She wrote into us a question about basic living expenses, sent us this question from the motel where she's staying.
I am curious as to when you're going to address a rent freeze or a waiver. A moratorium's not going to help us on the working class people of Colorado. Also, I'm disabled and I depend on a hotel right now. When are you going to factor people like that into that decision? Because lots of us are depending on hotels for housing now because rents are out of control.
Governor, is a rent freeze within your power? Are you considering it?
So what we've done and what is occurring now is one of our very first orders is nobody in Colorado, and you've been at some of the press conferences, if you're aware of an instance elevated to us, there are not enforcement orders being enforced for failure to pay rent. If there are, let us know. We'll do something about it. It's a decentralized system. But right now, people are not being evicted for not paying their rent for at least the 30 days. We'll probably extend that another 30 days. The only evictions that need to occur are emergency ones if there's a meth house or if there's a danger or something like that. But generally, people are not being evicted. The $1,200 from the federal government per person should be coming into your account very soon. If it's a couple, $2,400. That's up to $150,000 in income for the couple, $2,400. And no matter what your income level, $500 per kid, 16 and under. That's needed money. That is the federal government, Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, all agreeing that people need to be able to stay at home. And they can't be so desperate to go out and work and earn their rent that they're only spreading the virus and making the economic downturn worse. So the federal government is in effect paying people to stay at home. The least that we can do is earn that paycheck by doing everything that we can to stay at home, except when absolutely necessary.
We received another question on this same topic about the idea of whether a rent moratorium doesn't just kind of build up this wave of evictions that's going to come crashing through when folks can't afford their rent. Here's a question from Jack Elias in Colorado Springs.
I know we have eviction relief for people that can't pay their rent right now. What happens after that expires? Are people going to get evicted en masse?
Governor, is that something that the state can play a role in?
Well, we're a state of responsible people. I mean, when people are able to work and earn a living, they pay their rent, and that's you have all your costs. Now, the reason for these extraordinary steps, the $1,200, the halt on evictions, that's because we know what people are going through this month. It's going to be a tough month. I called it the lost month. I mean, we're all blessed to be on this wonderful place called Earth for, 900 or 1,000 months of our lives. Most of those months, hopefully, if you're fortunate, you'll have reasonably good health. You'll be able to work and support yourself. This month is not one of those for many Colorado families, but we hope to get back to that as soon as we can so that people can enjoy the rest of their lives and support themselves. And of course, when you have a job and support yourself, part of that responsibility is paying your rent or mortgage.
Betsy Markey, this next question is for you. You had mentioned gig workers and the resources available to them now. I can't tell, out of the 500 questions that we got, a whole ton of them were from gig workers in this economy. Angus and Tamara and Sarah in Denver, Kirsten in Lafayette, Keith and Ted in Aurora, all asking about folks who are either gig workers or they're independent contractors. These are folks who are trying to come into the unemployment system, trying to get resources, and they're being told, oh, wait, we got to wait for the feds to give us guidance, wait for the feds to give us guidance. Question from Janice in Broomfield about Uber drivers and from Ben Padilla in Thornton. Let's listen to Ben.
I happen to be a self-employed Uber driver. I drive full-time for Uber. And of course, since all of this stuff with the coronavirus, it's been a little challenging as far as picking up rides and stuff like that. My income has dropped down to about a quarter of what I normally make in a 50-hour work week. And so I've got a question for our governor. When will the funds that have been allocated for gig workers be available?
I could go ahead and answer that, Governor. Good question, and I know that it's got to be incredibly painful. The forgivable loans for gig workers, independent contractors, and sole proprietorships opens up this Friday. So this Friday, April 10th, you can apply for loans through your bank. So I would suggest that you contact your bank that you use right now and say, I'd like the application, I want to start filling it out. So come Friday, you are ready to go. So prepare now, apply on Friday. And get those loans that are up to $10 million for companies, but it really depends on your payroll costs. But start looking at that now. We just held today a webinar, and we're holding webinars almost daily. The one today was for, I'm in the gig economy, what support is available for me. We had 600 or 700 people on that call today. So I would also go to choosecolorado.com. That's our website, choosecolorado.com. You can find out lenders in your area that are participating in these loan programs. You can participate in webinars. You can get your questions answered by people who are working around the state at our small business development centers. But I urge you to utilize those people around the state that can answer your questions and help you during this difficult time.
Governor Polis, I want to turn attention back to the high country. And you think about some of those mountain communities. They were the first to see that kind of scary surge in COVID-19 cases, coupled with their limited resources up there. I remember that day when you warned at-risk folks, don't go into the high country. You don't want to be up there if you end up needing medical care. Then you've got the ski resorts shutting down up there, the impact of the loss of tourism. So they were kind of the first into the hurt. And they could be some of the last out if the air travel doesn't return and the tourism doesn't return. Katie Mikesell from Gunnison was wondering about specialized relief for mountain towns.
What are you going to do to help mountain communities recover from this? The mountains are such an important part of Colorado's identity, and we're hurting right now.
Our mountain communities, like the rest of Colorado, are strong, we're independent, and we're going to bounce back. And you know what? Our world-class resort areas, our ski slopes, our mountains, our 14ers, they're all going to be there long after you and I are gone, long after our great-great-great-great-great-grandkids are gone. And so look, this is temporary. Our natural assets, our incredible state, world-class tourism opportunities, there will be a day we're able to once again welcome, embrace tourists from around the world, spending money in our shops, enjoying our beautiful hikes and trails. And yes, that also means Denver Metro, Colorado Springs Metro residents will also be able to enjoy visiting our incredible mountain areas on weekends. But for the sake of those mountain areas right now, it's important that we let those communities recover. They have some of the highest rates in Eagle County in the entire country. They've been through a lot. They've lost some of their favorite sons and daughters. It's been very tough. In addition to the limited hospital capacity and the high altitude. So there's had to be a number of folks that, even with mild to moderate respiratory conditions, have to come down the mountain to a lower elevation.
I want to bring in the state epidemiologist, Dr. Rachel Hurley, on this. There was so much focus, Dr. Hurley, early on Vail, on Gunnison, and now as we've started to see some hot spots along the Front Range and up in Weld County, I kind of feel like at least our attention in the media has shifted. What is the current state of the fight against COVID-19 in the mountain towns?
Yeah, so there is certainly continued transmission across the state, including in our mountain communities. I do think, though, that especially our mountain communities are seeing the impact of lots of the social distancing recommendations that have been put in place and the orders from the governor to really slow transmission in those communities. Certainly, I think it's been important to have Coloradans and other tourists stay home and not, spend time in those mountain communities and increase the risk of transmission there. So certainly transmission is occurring across the state, and that's concerning, but we're making progress with social distancing strategies.
That's very good to hear. I'll stick with you for this next question. It's from Preston in Lockbuoy.
If I'm just playing out in my fence backyard with just my brothers, do I still need to wear a mask?
Preston wants to know if he needs to wear a mask in the backyard when he plays with his brothers in Lockbuoy. Dr. Hurley, what do you say?
Yeah, so I think masks are most important when you're going to be going out into the community, but we know that asymptomatic transmission is possible even in households. And so certainly if there are individuals that are going to and from households, when having close contact, it can make sense, especially if someone's a higher risk worker, to practice social distancing at home as well. And masks can certainly be part of that strategy.
Another question as it relates to the health angle of this, Dr. Hurley, is a forward-looking question, I think, about if we're able to get to a point where people who were sick, maybe never went to the hospital or anything else, are able to check COVID-19 off their box and are able to say, well, that's one less thing for me to worry about for at least the next few years. This question is from Elizabeth Johnson in Longmont.
Is there a test to find out if you have already had the COVID-19 virus?
Yeah, so the focus of the testing strategies right now are really to try and identify individuals who currently have the infection. Obviously, that's the people that we need to make sure are isolated, and those are the places where we can disrupt transmission. There are, though, serologic tests, which are blood tests that can identify whether or not someone had COVID-19 infection in the past. And so I think there will potentially be an increasing role for those types of tests. One way that they might be useful is to help us understand what the level of immunity could be across the state or in different communities across the state over time. But again, right now, the focus is trying to identify people who are symptomatic and have infection right now.
So, Dr. Hurley, I hear every single day from people who are convinced that they had COVID-19, and they're not looking for a certificate or a medal or anything. They want to be able to go in and to give blood, to give plasma, thinking that that might be helpful. But if we're not able to test those people, I imagine that our universe is going to be, what, down to those 5,000 confirmed cases, right?
Well, absolutely, testing is increasing, and we know that is an important strategy, especially going forward. And so we do expect that more and more people will be able to be tested as those resources come into our state and we expand places people can go to get testing in the laboratory capacity that exists here.
Governor, this next question is for you. It comes from David in Grand Junction, one of a number of Coloradans who wrote into us concerned about the people who are in close quarters in Colorado's jails and prisons.
I currently have a relative incarcerated in the Colorado Department of Corrections. What measures are currently being taken to help protect the inmates and the staff from the COVID-19 virus?
So the state runs a number of what we call 24/7 facilities. They need to be operated, all around the clock. That includes the state mental hospital, our jails, our youth detention facilities. There's also county-run facilities across the state. Early on, and I think we've issued 2 sets of rules and guidance, the ones that we control, the state, through our Department of Corrections, we're able to institute additional social distancing. We've taken blocks that were unoccupied and tried to spread folks around and keep the blocks to themselves. What that means for those of you who haven't spent time in a jail and prison, I hope that's most of you, is there's not people being transferred as much between prisons unless it's an emergency, and then the blocks are being isolated within the block. So we're taking all those steps to protect our guards, our prison guards, as well as those who are in the custody of the state. Obviously, at this time, we want to make sure that we can do everything we can to prevent that kind of outbreak in that controlled environment where it could spread. So we're taking those steps from the early days. Our Department of Corrections has been very proactive in, among the states and leading the way in that regard.
Governor, have you given consideration to doing something similar to California Governor Gavin Newsom, who, with restrictions, is intending to release a good number of low-level, non-violent offenders, non-sex offenders, just simply to reduce the numbers in the prison system?
So our numbers are okay. What we did with one of our executive orders is we removed restrictions on good behavior, what is it called, the time off earnings for good behavior for nonviolent. So there's a way to accelerate that for folks that were standing on parole. Some of them were, if they were already eligible for parole, they might have been expedited a bit. So with those techniques, obviously the last thing any of us want, Kyle, is for anybody dangerous to be let in any of our communities right now or ever. But we have, within the confines of keeping people safe, we have been able to open up enough space to give the prisons the flexibility they need to be able to make sure that that the inmates can be more isolated and that our guards have more ability to take precautions.
So just about every afternoon, President Trump is on television, among other things, promoting the use of the drug hydroxychloroquine. and want to talk to Dr. Hurley both about its potential use as a therapeutic in Colorado, but then I would also ask you to speak directly to the concern sent into us by Floyd Fernandez of Colorado Springs.
In light of the hydroxychloroquine controversy, I would like to know if there's anything you could do to help prevent a run on the medication, and reassure folks like my mother and I who have depended on it for years to control our lupus and rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah, those medications are certainly very important for certain individuals who have chronic medical conditions, and that's our first priority is using those medications where they have proven effectiveness to treat those individuals who really need those medications. Obviously, it's very important to study new medications like hydroxychloroquine and to determine if those medications are effective for treating COVID-19. And that's really the best place to be using these medications right now is in individuals who are enrolled in clinical trials, who are in hospitals, who really need those medications. That's the best place to use them and to study those drugs so that we can really figure out how they can be used most effectively going forward.
Have you heard anything about the use of the drugs in Colorado that you feel is solid enough to share publicly?
I think it's too soon to know. I think what's important to recognize with hydroxychloroquine and in all prescription medications is that there always are risks. And so that's really important part of the clinical trial process is to make sure we understand the risks associated with those medications, as well as understand the effectiveness of those medications. And so those studies are ongoing to really try and figure out that important effectiveness and risk balance when determining whether it's necessary to use these medications.
Governor Polis, when you first issued your emergency declaration, a bunch of journalists had to look up what exactly that allowed you to do. And there's a whole list of things, which I'm sure they've shared with you, even if you have no intention of doing these things. And a few of them jumped out at me, like getting involved in the pharmaceutical supplies around the state to pick where drugs go and how much can go around in other places. Limiting the sales of guns and ammo, which is a hot topic, but you haven't suggested that, so we won't talk about it. And then shutting down liquor stores, which we saw how that worked in Denver for 3 hours. There were almost riots in the streets. Returning to the issue of pharmacies and pharmaceuticals, have you seen anything or been told anything by CDPHE that suggests that the state needs to get its hands in that market?
So the short answer is no, absolutely not. Let me also address the previous question about some of these promising therapies. We want Colorado to be a place where there are clinical trial opportunities for the maximum number of potential therapies for COVID-19. So there's at least 3 clinical trials. I talked to the head of Anschutz today. There's a number of patients being treated with plasma, with a number of different promising therapies. But no, because there's no cure for this yet. There's certainly no issue on the pharmaceutical front. The only one that we're even aware of is obviously patients that are on ventilators need sedation. I think the hospitals are in a good place with regard to their ability to sedate people. But that's the only issue that the hospitals and doctors have even elevated that they were at all concerned about with regard to COVID-19.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah, that was the first drug that in New York City a lot of the hospitals had to look for alternatives to was the sedation drug. An economic question now, and Governor, I'd like to pose this to you. There's a population in Colorado living and working in this country illegally. Population all told roughly the size of Fort Collins. People whose work is crucial to keeping this state functioning and who are our friends and neighbors. And Edgar in Pueblo has a question about them.
What are you doing to help the undocumented community in Colorado who pay taxes and because of the COVID-19 are without a job and they won't be getting any stimulus checks?
Well, I think, ultimately when it comes to saving somebody's life, no doctor, no hospital is asking for their papers. They're not looking at their background, where they're from, who they are. Those nurses, those doctors are going to do their best to save everybody that they can who contracts COVID-19, just as they do every day. I also did a letter that calls upon the administration to continue the DACA program. That's the program that allows the people that grew up here and have legal permission to work, that we want to make sure that doesn't expire and they somehow lose their legal permission to work. But this is a moment when it comes to spreading the virus makes no distinctions. And so we need to do our best to make sure that, you know, everybody stays at home whenever possible. And if they do go out, wear a mask if at all possible.
At the intersection of immigration status and health in Colorado for months prior to the COVID-19 pandemic was the immigration detention facility in Aurora, in which there were some infectious disease outbreaks inside while there were protests outside. Governor, a question now from Ana Rodriguez in Lakewood.
What is he going to do with his expanded power during this state of emergency to protect the immigrants in the immigrant detention centers like the Geo Detention Center in Aurora?
So we talked about our jails and prisons that are under the state, the steps we're taking with our prisons at our sites and working closely with the Department of Corrections. The ICE detention facility is a federal facility. We are continuing to encourage them, as members of the congressional delegation has, to take those same kind of social distancing measures. I would certainly encourage them to release people that are only there for civil violations, not those that are there for criminal violations. I think that's very important that they take that step. But we need to ask our congressman, our president, to do that. You know, that's not a decision that I'm allowed to make. You talked about the decisions I'm allowed to make, I'm not allowed to make. I cannot affect people that are in federal detention with my state orders as governor, but I certainly call upon the president to release those that are being held only for civil reasons and not criminal reasons.
I want to talk about another political issue as it relates to the general election in November. There's a nationwide push by Democrats in a number of states to allow mail-in voting, as Colorado has, or if not that, then the widespread use of absentee voting. Republicans have expressed concerns about voter fraud and issues like that. Colorado has bipartisan consensus around our mail-in elections, which have been run in recent years by Democrats and Republicans without much of an issue. Rebecca Henderson lives in Denver, and she's curious, Governor, whether you also think that Colorado could be a national model on this.
I would really like to see the rest of the country have an excellent mail-in ballot system the way that we have here in Colorado. So I was wondering, what can Colorado do to expand the mail-in ballot nationally? Like, is there a task force we can have? Is there a way for us to, you know, get out there and, you know, help people, make sure people can vote and remove all the barriers, especially if, you know, we see another wave of this in the fall, and I think that would be a really great contribution to the nation.
Yeah, so to me, it's weird even watching why this is controversial in some states. And I know I've heard from Coloradans who've moved to other states who are like, I can't get a ballot. It seems obvious. I mean, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they get their ballot in the mail, they vote. I mean, it's not a big deal here. We've been doing it for a long time. I mean, we went to all mail, you know, I don't know, was it 4 or 6 years ago, but even before that, you know, most of us voted by a mail. I barely even remember a time before we had that. In my adult life, it's just common sense. Of course we should do that. You know, Republicans win, Democrats win. Frankly, if either party thinks that they're going to lose just because people are voting, that's a problem for that party. But I know Republicans, Democrats, you know, Greens, Libertarians, they're up to that challenge. Independents, I mean, of course, the elections are about the people choosing. Mail-in ballots are not even controversial here in Colorado. They've been going on for years. And, you know, I think people should still be able to vote on Election Day like they can in Colorado. For some reason, you don't want to vote by mail. But it works well. It's a good model. Other states should do it.
Another question that has a political angle to it. I mean, I remember back in the campaign, Governor, when I asked you if you were interested in overturning the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and you said, no, interested in reforming it, not overturning it. There are other folks in your party, other Democrats, that would like to do away with it altogether. I'm not looking to have a big political discussion here, but there were a number of Coloradans who wrote in to ask how Tabor, which has a heavy hand in how our state collects and spends money, might impact our recovery efforts. Questions from Randy Runyon in Denver and Matt Schwartz in Gunnison. Let's listen to Matt.
What challenges will Tabor present to our state budget as we attempt to recover from this crisis?
I would say that Tabor will not be consequential in this matter because of the devastating impact on the economy, the state is going to have budgetary cutbacks. They're not going to be even close to that limit level where there's a limitation on state spending. So it could be a year, it could be years before that even becomes a relevant discussion. It's not a relevant discussion when the state is well under that level as we were during the Great Recession, as we expect to be because of the devastating economic impact of the virus and this pandemic.
Dr. Hurley, this next question is for you, and this is a tough question. This is from a Coloradan who I think, like a lot of us, has sat down and thought about what choices they would want to make if they contracted COVID-19 and ended up in one of those worst-case scenarios. Philip Linnebauer is a 59-year-old from Colorado Springs and wants to ask this question about ventilators.
What number of hospitalized patients go on to be ventilated, and what is the survival rate and the general outcome as far as aftercare, hospitalizations, and support by age group? We see the number of hospitalized, we see the numbers of people passing. I myself, I'm 59 years old, and I really don't even know if I want to ever go on a ventilator. And I'd like to be able to have my demise in my own natural settings if things ever happen like that. So that's my question basis.
Yes, so he's absolutely correct in that the need for hospitalization and need for a ventilator or ICU care really depends on your age group and chronic medical conditions that might exist. So we know that the need for hospitalization among young children is probably less than 1%. But when you get to adults over the age of 60, that number can perhaps get up to around 20% might need hospitalization. And then from there, of those individuals that need hospitalization, it might be somewhere in the range of 5 to 10% that might need care in an ICU. And most of those ICU patients do end up needing ventilators. And I think tragically, we do know that the illness being caused by COVID-19 in older adults and people with chronic medical conditions is quite severe. We don't know precise estimates yet for the case fatality, but we do know that, if individuals are severely ill, that a certain percentage of those individuals are going to die. And the likelihood of death is much greater in individuals who are older and again have more severe underlying chronic diseases.
Dr. Hurley, some of the initial numbers out of New York City suggest that the majority of the patients who end up on a ventilator do not survive. Do you believe that to be the case in Colorado?
I think it's still too early to tell. We've actually been asking the ICU providers across the state to share their experience with us. And I think, the patients that go onto ventilators for COVID-19 end up staying on ventilators for quite a long time. And so it's still too early in the state to understand what outcomes are in an ICU setting.
Dr. Hurley, this next question is for you as well. It comes from Laura Blevins in Thornton. She is 32 weeks pregnant.
Recently, some hospitals in New York went against the guidance of the CDC, WHO, and the Department of Health and banned all support people from labor and delivery and postpartum units. After a public outcry, the governor declared that a support person during labor is in fact essential. How can you ensure that the right for laboring women to have one chosen support person during labor will be safeguarded throughout hospitals in Colorado?
Yeah, I think that's probably a policy consideration, but I think it's important to talk to your OBGYN or your healthcare provider to make sure that you have a plan in place and any restrictions that might be in place if you are planning to deliver soon. I think it's also important to identify alternate strategies. So we all are using much more technology these days to be socially close to the people we care about. And so I think those are some strategies to consider as well if you're someone that's going to be going into a facility to deliver soon.
Governor Polis, would you imagine that you would weigh in on that if we got to a situation where hospital systems were saying, that spouses couldn't be in the delivery room? I know Governor Cuomo got involved in that in New York. Is that something you're even considering?
So one of the important early steps we took was to delay elective surgery. That's not what we're talking about here, but that freed up some beds for the everyday conditions Coloradans have. I mean, you talk about giving birth, but it could be a heart attack, an appendectomy. All that stuff is still happening across our state, Kyle. It doesn't stop just because COVID's here. So that takes up a lot of beds. And so we're doing everything we can to push those elective procedures into the future so we can free up those beds now as we build more beds for the COVID-19 patients. Let me also add another reason to stay home to avoid this virus. I think your listener was from Colorado Springs voiced this, or the one that said he might not want to be ventilated. This is not a good way to go, Kyle. I mean, your friends and your family can't be there with you because you're being isolated, you're sedated, you're on a machine. I mean, there's no good way to go. We've all lost family members, some quick and unexpected, some after a long time. But this in particular, especially because you can't have that physical proximity in the last days or weeks or ever get to say goodbye, it's just another reason that we all should stay at home whenever we can to avoid that fate happening to a family member, a loved one, or yourself.
Yeah. Anybody who's thinking about taking a risk that might endanger somebody else's life. I think about my friend in the last week who wasn't able to be there with his grandmother when she passed out of state, and then watched her funeral on Skype. And you would not wish that on anybody. Betsy Markey, let me bring you in for one last question to you here. Your message to businesses and employers about how they balance wanting to appear open to business and then being safe, allowing people to wear masks and so on and so forth. A question from Paula Greason in Denver. She's an employment attorney.
I'm an employment lawyer, and I'm getting questions from employees who work in critical businesses that are still open, not healthcare, but for instance, a service department of a car dealership. The employee wants to wear a mask and gloves to work, and the boss is saying no. They want to know what rights they have.
You know, that is a legal question. Wow, that's terrible to hear, and a very good question. Employees should have the right. The governor has made strong suggestions that people should wear face coverings, and particularly those who are working with the public. I would certainly want to contact your attorney to that person's attorney to see what rights they have to take against their employer. But of course, we want all businesses that are staying open to take every single precaution to keep their workers safe. And I have seen the vast majority of business owners are being responsible in that way. Those that aren't should certainly contact you, contact other attorneys to find out what their rights are, and not go to work as well, because that is just putting not only themselves but every other worker and every other customer they're coming into contact with at risk.
Governor Polis, you know that there are some Coloradans who would like you to either put the state patrol at every road in and out of Colorado, or would like you to stop every flight coming in from New Orleans and New York. Feel free to speak about that, but I also have a question for you from Lauren Danforth from Littleton, who wonders about how travel in and out of our state will work once restrictions begin to be lifted.
With the shelter-in-place ban being lifted on April 26, hopefully, what would prevent us from seeing an uprise in the corona cases once we can travel to and from our loved ones? And also, my concern would be that we can also travel to cities and states where they don't have such good control over the coronavirus.
So first of all, it seems like nitpicking, Kyle, but I want to make sure that people know, and you know this is not shelter in place. That's a different standard. This is stay at home except when absolutely necessary. Shelter in place means you can't leave your home. It's if there's an active shooter situation. The stay at home, it's expected that you might leave your home to walk your dog, you go to the grocery store, but you minimize that. You don't leave your home unless absolutely necessary, and then you wear a facial mask when you do go out. Look, as the country reopens, as the world reopens, of course, this is a situation. Colorado won't be unique in figuring out how we not just contain the virus, but prevent reinfection at a level that jeopardizes our lives or our economy. But right now, we have it here, Kyle. I mean, so this is not today's concern. I mean, we have tens of thousands of cases, right? Over 5,000 confirmed, but tens of thousands, 30, 40,000 people are likely have COVID-19 here in Colorado. Many of them don't know it. Many are asymptomatic, might be spreading. That is the concern and why we need to stay at home right now and why we need to fix this. Yes, once you get that movement towards returning to normal, towards being able to go about our business, then we start having the concerns about how we address the flow of people from areas that might have higher infection rates than Colorado.
Governor Polis, one last question for you. This one is my favorite. It's from Meredith Feniak in Denver, who is curious whether there might be a team of optimists within the state working on trying to figure out how to turn this ugly situation into a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do something good.
I'm wondering how we can use this to make Colorado a better place. I'm an eternal optimist, and I hate to see everything falling apart, but it seems like there are things that we could institute during this pause that could make Colorado fantastic. So I want to know if there's some sort of task force set to look at what's happening now and what changes we could make on the restart.
Yesterday in my remarks, I quoted St. Francis of Assisi that one candle is enough to light the darkness. It all begins with those good acts, those kind acts that in these dark times, the heart of people, the values of people really comes through. It's the person who's picking up groceries for their 75-year-old neighbor so they don't have to go out. It's the person who's doing their best to make sure that others who are having a tougher time are able to get by in this crisis. It's a small business owner who's keeping people on payroll even though they're not able to get revenue or do business, doing the right thing and making sure that they have their health care and the environment. These challenging times are really tests of our character. And I hope that really everybody in this crisis, optimist or not, is really able to look themselves in the mirror and say to themselves, did I do everything I could? If that means staying home and that's all you can do, are you doing that? If it means keeping people on payroll, if it means doing errands for elderly neighbors so they don't have to go out, we all should ask ourselves that question about how we're rising to this occasion, how we're being that candle and that light that illuminates us all in these difficult and dark times.
Governor Polis, thank you for your time. Thanks also to Betsy Markey from the Office of Economic Development, as well as the state epidemiologist, Dr. Rachel Herlihy. We wish you all the best in your work. All right, Colorado, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. We are putting together an online Q&A of the questions and answers we saw tonight. We will text you the link to that evolving form that we're filling with all this information if you text 303-871-1491. A final thought tonight. Our choices matter. We are facing a challenge, but it's not a tornado or a blizzard. We have the ability to bend the curve, to make an impact through the individual choices that each of us makes, so that we're able to look back years from now and say, we went through a tough time, but what we did mattered. What we did made it better. From my home to yours, good night.